Hey guys, SEC fans here. We're going to jump out of the conference to do a non conference game. Every week, we like to try to get out of the SEC and cover one game outside conference play that we think is pretty interesting or a big notable national matchup. Try to give an outsider's perspective and trying to be as objective as we can. You're going to hear our opinions here. And those opinions we try to give up, back them up with facts. We don't try to throw hot air at you and tell you what we think is going to happen in this game without giving some reason for you to maybe believe that at least we've got a point. Now, this week you're hearing Josh on the audio, and the reason for that is Daniel, unfortunately, is in India for business and just isn't able to get an internet connection to be able to broadcast with us. But we still wanted to get some models out, have some sort stuff for you guys. Hopefully you like it, and if you do like it, please subscribe. I mean, it does a lot for us to help grow our channel. If you comment, let us know what you think. We're going to mix it up in the comments with you guys. We do it every week. Just try not to come at us and tell us we're wrong without backing it up. Give us some reason, why if we think your quarterback's not going to be successful that we're wrong, and tell us why. Tell us where we have the data wrong or what we're overlooking, and we're going to respect you if you do that. We're not into hot takes. We're not going to be here to tell you your conference is down or not down. We're just here to look at your two teams and from an outsider's perspective, tell you what we think about this matchup of you versus your opponent. Anyway, this week we're doing Clemson versus North Carolina State. It's an interesting matchup in particular because North Carolina State is so unproven with a canceled game against West Virginia. We don't have a lot of benchmarks, but I think one of the interesting things to me is that if you look at the schedule and you see a Clemson schedule, North Carolina State schedule, I think a lot of people, especially SEC fans that may watch this, might assume Clemson's schedule was probably a good deal harder than North Carolina State's. That's not necessarily a given. Texas A&M was almost certainly the toughest team these two teams have played, and I'll say in Clemson's defense that we've been pretty adamant on our show that Texas A&M, in our view, probably is the second best team in the SEC. They haven't had a chance to play LSU yet, but I think there's a pretty good shot that Texas A&M may beat LSU just due to their rush defense. So that was actually a very good quality win for Clemson, and I think probably doesn't get nearly as much credit for that win as they should be getting. But outside that, Georgia Southern, obviously not a good team, but Georgia Tech has not been very good this year. Syracuse has not lived up to expectations, and Wake Forest has been pretty bad. On the flip side, with North Carolina State, Georgia State and Marshall aren't anything to write home about, but Virginia and Boston College have been good teams, both of them. Now, Boston College started the year strong, kind of faded, but they've been a good team throughout the season. There was a point where they were flirting with the rankings. Virginia, same boat. So I think it's easy to overlook North Carolina State's schedule, even with having that game canceled due to weather, and sort of ignore the fact that what North Carolina State's been able to do, being undefeated to this point, is a fairly impressive accomplishment. Now, I'm going to get pretty quickly into the model here because I don't want you guys to have to listen to my voice drone on for too terribly long. But, we do a computer model every week, and the basis of our computer model, it's totally per play averages. So we're trying to take tempo out of the equation there. And what we'll do is look at you relationally to your opponent, try to figure out what your production is going to look like versus this team based off what they're good at defensively and what you're good at offensively. And then we build a scoring model unique to your team. So, based off where your team is needed to produce, or how your team is needed to produce in order to score, we're going to build a unique scoring model to you. It does factor in things like turnovers, big plays, special teams, all that stuff factors into it. To the extent it's a pattern, I will say. Sometimes people really want us to factor in turnovers, or have this discrete statistic. One, we don't try to do that too much because I don't want to inject my own viewpoint into it. I want to set this up where the model makes its own decision and I can say whether or not I agree with it, but it's the model's opinion. It's a computer's opinion, not my own. And the second thing is a lot of stuff is really variable. If you're a team that averages 4 turnovers a game for the other team, you probably don't get 4 each and every game. Even in that situation, you get one game and maybe 5 the next. Most teams are averaging maybe 1 to 2 turnovers per game, and it's really in that range. But even in that range, some games you get 0, some games you get 3. So our scoring model is going to give you credit for that to the extent that maybe you're a 2016 Alabama, and I say that because they scored a non-offensive touchdown I think in 10 straight games that year, and their score predictions were always higher than most teams would be for offensive output. And if it's not consistent, then the model's not necessarily going to throw it in there. And we'll talk about it on the show as something that may come up, but we're not going to say that we can predict it will happen because it's probably unlikely to occur in a given instance. Anyway, getting straight into the numbers here, I think this is an interesting matchup because this has this pretty close. One of the intervening statistics we look at is percentages allowed of your opponent's offense, and what that means is if your opponent averages 5 yards per carry, you allow 4. You average 80. You allow 80% of their averages. We do this again. It's all relational because we want to know. I don't care if you allow 4 yards per carry if the other team's only average 3.5, or maybe you allow 4 yards per carry, but your opponents all average 6. So that's actually a pretty good mark. Either way, both these teams are pretty good. Clemson, 54% of opponent rushing averages. That's darn elite. And it's unsurprising given the defensive line. I'm not going to harp on that because everybody knows it. But that's a great number. North Carolina State, though, still pretty good at 82% of opponent averages. That's a good mark. I'm a little cautious with that because half the games here, we don't include FCS games. So half the games here are teams out of conference, Georgia State and Marshall. Those numbers tend to be skewed in any model because there's a lack of relational data. And what I mean by that is all Marshall's offensive production is viewed in the standpoint of Marshall's conference, not in the viewpoint of an ACC. So whereas it's, one thing to hold Virginia to a low rush number because Virginia's played, maybe common opponents. Marshall, maybe 4.5 yards per carry. They'd never have that average if they're in the ACC. No model is going to be particularly good at that. It's a problem in college football with a limited number of data sets and teams that tend to be pretty isolated in terms of schedules. But anyway, 54% of it rush averages by Clemson, 86 for North Carolina State. Passing defense, 86% by Clemson. That's a good number. But North Carolina State, 97%, that's not. You want to be below 95 because, again, you've got cupcakes on the schedule. You can get a little bit of getting a good number there. It's hard to get passing defense numbers down because pass teams tend to work more or less against everybody they play to a large extent. Much more than rushing offenses. You can shut down a rush game much easier than you can shut down a pass game. We've done this for several years, and it repeatedly shows itself as in our statistics. But Clemson at 86% is quite good, but still, I would say good to very good, but not exceptional, not elite, just very good. But what I think is interesting to sort of stop here for a moment is the North Carolina State is allowing 3.5 yards per carry. And I said what's interesting there is one of the curiosities to me, and I've watched a lot of football from both these teams, and I've watched a ton of Clemson football. Full disclosure, I have some good friends here that are Clemson fans that live near me, and a couple times I've watched their games with them. Not a Clemson fan, but pretty much neutral to Clemson, and I've watched a whole lot of Clemson football pretty closely this year. Clemson's played some teams that are pretty bad in rush defense this year. Georgia Southern's actually the best mark, allowing 4 yards per carry. Georgia Tech's the next best at 4.1. But then you march down that schedule, you got Syracuse allowing 4.7 yards per carry. It's 97th nationally. And then Wake Forest, 5.9 yards per carry, 124th nationally. It's actually one of the worst marks of, I think, maybe the worst rush defense in Power 5. So all these teams, Georgia Southern and on, are all ranked 60th or 61st or worse. So these are all bottom half nationally rush defenses. And now you're playing a team in North Carolina State that may not necessarily be the world's best rush defense, but they're still solid. That 3.4 yards per carry, 5 yards per carry allowed is a darn good mark. And it's darn good to the tune of allowing North Carolina State to be 28th nationally. So much better than anybody else Clemson's played in that regard. And the past few games, a lot of what we've seen from Clemson has been a passing offense that's not been terribly productive, but it's been offset by Etienne basically doing whatever he wanted on the offensive side of the football. So I think what we're going to see from this game is a lot of what the model's pointing out. The Clemson offense, 5.7 yards per carry is a very good average. 8 yards per attempt is also quite good. Anything over 6.5 yards per attempt is good. So you end up with about a 6.8 yard per play total. That's a good mark and good. The model sees Clemson getting about 33 points out of that based off previous marks. Now, That said, 6.8 yards per play may be a lot, but that would be the second worst yard per play total Clemson's had this year. They actually averaged 7.6 yards per play against Texas A&M. The lowest was Syracuse at 5.7. Next lowest Georgia Tech at 7.3. So it's basically saying this is somewhere north of where it was what the yardage Clemson got against Syracuse, which obviously a lot of extenuating circumstances there. It's not predicting the Syracuse game, but it's saying that that looks offensively more like that game than it does the others, where they had at least over 7 yards per play, a half yard per play more in every one of those games. North Carolina State offensively is interesting. I mean, North Carolina State's expected to not be able to run the ball at all. And that's not surprising because North Carolina State has failed to run the ball in a lot of games this year. Under 4 yards per play against Georgia State, under 4 yards per play against Marshall, 4.5 against UVA, 4.3 against Boston College. Here, 2.2 yards per play, running, yards per carry. And that's just a bad mark. And that's one dimensional. The saving grace for North Carolina State in this game is that they are a pass first offense. They are more heavily slated to the pass than the run, and they are expected to have 8 yards per attempt. So essentially, the North Carolina State passing game a little bit more effective than Clemson's, but just by the tiniest of decimal points. But the difference being that Clemson can run the ball and North Carolina State cannot. And for that reason, the model does have Clemson winning 33-28. But this is a close game. It's a 5-point game, Clemson over North Carolina State. And I mentioned that whole thing about turnovers earlier. And the reason I mentioned that is, the model can't tell you whether this is going to be a +2 turnover differential game or a 0 turnover differential game. We talk a lot that anytime you're within 7 points, you're really talking about whether or not a guy catches one deep pass or one fumble goes one way or the other. We've talked this season, Notre Dame and Michigan. Notre Dame dominated Michigan for the most part for 3 quarters, but that game really came down to one pass where Notre Dame connected on a deep shot to the end zone after Metello, the backup safety for Michigan, got ejected from the game. If that doesn't happen, I'm not sure Notre Dame wins the game. I'm not sure Michigan doesn't come back because Notre Dame couldn't stop them in the fourth quarter. So, I mean, it is in that kind of a margin. Clemson does have, a bit of an advantage here, but you're still talking about one turnover. And then, the last thing I'll say here is, and to me, this is a little concerning. I personally have been critical of the decision to start Trevor Lawrence over Kelly Bryant, frankly. And I know why it was done. And we're very critical on this channel and have been pretty consistently. A lot of Clemson fans probably have heard us the past couple of years because we've done playoff games, especially on what happens when you have a run first quarterback and you play high level teams. As I said, talking about defensive statistics, everything I brought up earlier, I try to do for a reason. Passing deep offenses are a lot harder to slow down than rush offenses. If you're a really good defense and you have talent, you can key on the run and you can shut it down. But you can't necessarily key on the passing defense or passing offense and completely shut it down. I bet the best we ever see is holding teams to about 75% of their passing offense. So if you've got, you got a team that averages 10 yards per attempt, they're still going to get 7.5. They're still going to move the football by throwing it. But if you got a team that averages 6 yards per carry and you're a really good defense, you absolutely can hold them to 3 and shut down the run. I think Dabo is well aware of that. It's why he's switched to Trevor Lawrence. My concern is, you make the comparison what Alabama did with Tagovailoa last year. Well, one, I think what we've seen from Tagovailoa this year is that he was probably even underrated as a near generational passer. And I will say that having watched a lot of SEC games, the kid just straight up doesn't miss. And it's been crazy to see what he's able to do. Again, it's just, even his last week, I will say that's slight diversion, but Tagovailoa's QB rating against Missouri in a game where he had a sprained MCL, and he, really kind of struggled, went 12 for 20. That QB rating was still higher than Baker Mayfield's average that set the QB rating mark, and that was the worst of Tagovailoa's career. So that's kind of, what you're trying to compare yourself to. If you think Lawrence is the Tagovailoa decision, one, I think Lawrence could be an exceptionally good quarterback and live up to his billing and still not be as good as Tagovailoa, who's seems to be a one in 10 year kind of kid. And then the other thing is Tagovailoa did not play until he had an entire season of practice. He was an early enrollee, and he had 15 days of bowl practice, and even playoff practice. So practice before that, past that when he played in the championship game, and still came in a little bit rusty. So Lawrence, I don't know. I think I see the arm talent there at times. I don't think he's comfortable enough with the playbook right now to execute it as fast as he needs to. I don't think he's comfortable with the speed of the game where he has the clock in his head moves as fast as it should. And a lot of times I see him scramble and run. And I know that he's a good runner. Now he was clocked around a 4.8, I believe, in the Nike opening. I've had people tell me he's faster than Bryant, and he absolutely is not if you go back and look at the Nike numbers. But he's a good runner. I mean, tight end speed is good for a quarterback. It's very good. The problem is that he's 6'6", and he's built like a punter. He's kind of lanky, and he's exactly what you want in a pocket passer. But I don't think he's quite really realized yet or gotten it in his head, how physical opposing defenses are. I wasn't shocked when he got hurt against Syracuse. And I say all this to bring around the point again. This is all my opinion, but I'll back it up a little bit. When Trevor Lawrence went out of the game against Syracuse, I think the deceptive thing is that Clemson's offense was not operating particularly well. He had 10 of 15, which was good, 67%, but only 93 yards, which was 6.2 yards per attempt. The offense had not been very successful, and really hadn't moved the ball very well. And I've talked a lot in that Texas A&M game. He played 5 series in that game, and his opening throw was a touchdown. But in my view, if you go back and watch that play, T. Higgins skies the ball. Safety takes a bad angle, runs into the corner, and Higgins houses it. It's a good play by Lawrence, but it should have never been a touchdown in terms of what, any competent defense should not let Higgins run the rest of the way for a touchdown there. And when you've got 2 players there to make the tackle and a guy that's having to go up to get the ball, you should be able to wrap him up while he secures the ball and at least bring him down and play, no matter, really how talented the guy is. They weren't able to do that because A&M secondary is very rough. But outside that one play, Clemson only had 1 first down with Lawrence in the game, and the other 4 possessions that he had the ball. Bryant won him that game. And because of that, I have real concerns that even the statistics here that have Clemson winning 33-28 are still based off half the season where Bryant was in there. And since Bryant's gone out, Lawrence was 6.2 yards per attempt against Syracuse. He was only 7 yards per attempt against Wake Forest. He did have 2 touchdowns. He was 80% passing, but not great per attempt numbers. Now, partly you can say they're not asking him to do much, but even if that's the case, it is limiting the offense. And it hasn't hurt the run game because especially Wake Forest defense was so bad that Etienne, who's a very good back, was able to tear them up. You're not going to get that kind of production against North Carolina State. You're not going to be able to dominate them on the ground. They are solid enough to make you have to play a legitimate defense or a legitimate offense and have to move the ball around. I am skeptical in this game of whether Clemson is going to be able to consistently move the ball with Lawrence the way they need to, because they don't have the ability with Bryant, who I think was an underrated passer. Obviously he in the run game he added an element. And he strained teams, and then he did enough to be able to execute for the most part. Because of that, I'm actually going to go away from the model. The model has Clemson winning 33-28. I think North Carolina State probably steps up here. I am concerned with the fact that in the past, Finley has been a very good quarterback. He's been very successful, but he has not always been successful when he's been heavily pressured. And I have, real concerns of the fact that, like when they played last year late in the year and he started getting banged up, 6.8 yards per attempt against Clemson, 4.5 against Boston College, 6.3 against Wake Forest. There's signs when he starts to get hit and he takes hits and he's banged up that he's not nearly as effective as he is otherwise. And I'm not sure that North Carolina State's offensive line, that is actually pretty good, is still going to be able to handle the elite line that Clemson has. So he may take some hits. But that said, Finley has been excellent this year. And I know they haven't played great competition, but I mean, he's throwing for 8 to 10 yards per attempt in every game in FBS play. And considering the fact that Clemson, to the extent that you can move the ball in Clemson, it's probably going to be through the air. That's a pretty good matchup. I already said that North Carolina State's going to be completely one-dimensional in this game, and I'm not sure how that affects things. but Clemson's certainly been better in terms of a run defense than they have been a pass rush. They're still a very good pass rush, but they're dominant against the run. North Carolina State does not depend on the run by any means, as I established earlier. They are a throw first team. I think North Carolina State can put up points in this game. And, my bold prediction is I think Trevor Lawrence struggles, frankly, against playing what really will be the first real defense that he has played. So I have Clemson 24, North Carolina State 28. And nothing's going to surprise me here, but that's just my personal outlook on the game. So anyway, if you like what we have to say, please subscribe. And if you don't like it, go in the comments and let us know what you disagreed with. And don't just tell me I'm an idiot. Come at me with some numbers. Tell me where I've missed things. What detail have I missed in these two teams? And we'll mix it up with the comments, and we'll totally give you a mea culpa if there's something we've overlooked or something we've missed. But we don't have a dog in this fight. I'm just trying to comment on these two teams from my own opinion. Hopefully you found it entertaining and objective. That's the goal. Sorry for the monologue, but normally we have my co-host Daniel, who's just unfortunately, again, he's in India for work. So, all right. Thanks, guys. God bless, and hopefully we'll do another video for you guys again later this year.